If you're anything like me, you're always looking for ways to make your Dungeons & Dragons game just a little bit better and more enjoyable for your players. In this video, I go over 5 easy ways to make your game just a little bit better and take it to the next level. Firstly, I always make it a point to have some kind of background music or ambient noise going during the game because, for me, that increases the immersiveness of that particular game session. And music and ambient sounds help set the mood, and the right music cue can also evoke very strong emotions from your players. For example, in a game I ran recently, the beginning of the game sees the players attending a birthday party for a young dwarven princeling. And as they're enjoying the party, it gets attacked by orcs, and the orcs start kidnapping dwarven children off the street. Well, the players attempted to stop some of the orcs from kidnapping some children, and so they attacked these orcs. It was a time-sensitive encounter, and the players were not able to stop the orcs before they got away with the children. After they failed, I described what happened throughout the whole city as people realized that all these kids have been kidnapped and taken away, and I played Gandalf's Lament. So that sad music is playing, I'm describing what happened, and combination of the music and my description of what was going on caused some of my players to cry openly at the table. And it was a fantastic moment in the game, so the music really drove home the emotion of that particular scene. As you're watching this video, you're attacked by a dragon. Roll initiative. If my roll is higher than yours, subscribe. If yours is higher than mine, like the video. Okay, thanks. The reason I say this is not to take away from the imagination in your brain, but to help your brain have a break, because, some people do well with theater of the mind and combat and knowing, in their head where monsters and characters are. That doesn't work for me very well. I have ADHD, and so it's very hard for me to keep track of things in my head. So if I have a battle mat and minis on the table, I can see exactly where all the players and monsters are. The players can see, and then there's no dispute about the position of certain monsters, so certain game mechanics become a lot easier to enforce and use in combat. You don't have to get fancy with this. The board can just be a piece of graph paper, and your pieces can be those little sorry pieces or pieces from another game. Also, when players bring a customized mini to the table, it's really fun for them. They get to use this mini that they have taken time to represent their character. They've probably painted it and customized it because that's part of the joy of this hobby. Within reason, let players do cool things. And what I mean by that is don't make everything a skill check. In one of the first games I played, my character was a rogue, and at the beginning of the game, when all the players were introducing themselves, I was in a tavern on a balcony, and some other players were coming into town down the main road, and I was overlooking that road. And so I turned to the DM and said, hey, I see the other players coming. I want to introduce myself by taking a forward leap over the balcony and landing in the street in front of them. And so the DM made me roll an acrobatics check, which I kind of failed. And so instead of doing this cool front flip over the balcony and landing in the street, which is just one story below, I kind of did an awkward shamble down one of the columns and walked over it. It was kind of lame. My little stunt wouldn't have broken the game. There was no combat involved. It was just the very beginning of the game. I was just introducing my character. I wanted to do it in a cool way. So if your players want to do cool things that aren't going to break the game or necessarily break the rules, then let them do it. Putting a time limit on players' turns during combat does two things. First, combat runs a lot faster because players have a limited time window that they're allotted to make a decision on their turn. And if they fail to make a decision, then they lose their action due to inaction. Secondly, it encourages players to remain engaged with the combat and think ahead when it's not their turn. Especially players who have a little more complicated actions that they can perform on their turn, they need to be planning and strategizing ahead of time instead of waiting to do that on their turn, and so this gets rid of all the unnecessary fluff that tends to make combat drag out. Finally, use your players' imaginations to your advantage. And what I mean by that is that oftentimes, me particularly, when I'm trying to describe a scene or let players know what the city looks like, I get worried that they're going to miss things because it's not going to come out exactly how it is in my head. And that's the point. People's imaginations are very powerful engines. The imagination is the game engine for Dungeons & Dragons. What you need to keep in mind is that a very simple sentence will let your player's imagination run wild, and they will fill in the rest of the details. So when you're describing a city or a town, maybe describe a few key locations, some prominent landmarks, and leave the rest up to your player's imagination. This way, you don't have to stress about getting all the details right, and your players are free to imagine the world as they see it.